Welcome to the first in a two-part tutorial flight for Aerosoft CRJ. In this episode we're going to cover from cold and dark up to cruise. Welcome also to the SimHanger. My name's Mark, the SimHanger for all things flight sim related. We'll be departing from Burning Blue Designs, Farnborough Airport. This is a fantastic rendition by Burning Blue of Farnborough. The airport being famous of course for air shows and of course being the birthplace of British aviation, and our tutorial is in the CRJ 700. We're cold and dark, all the doors are open, chocks in place, but the ground power unit not connected as we're using the APU today. For our flight today we're going to be flying a standard instrument departure from Farnborough over Southampton, then across the English Channel for a standard arrival procedure into Jersey. I'll not be covering off all the details of the EFB, but here are my main settings. My IRS alignment is set to quick, so it's about 5 minutes, and my weights are set to kgs. I'm using the default VNAV settings and not the coupled VNAV, which gives you VNAV on your autopilot, as many CRJs don't have this facility. With that out the way, let's get started. First of all, let's just check that our gear is down, which it is. Now to check the handbrake, and to be on it needs to be pulled all the way up. That looks good. We can now start bringing the aircraft to life. The overhead panel and master switch on. Leave the DC service switch off. This is only normally used by maintenance, if they want to do something like move the aircraft and get the lights on without starting up the whole procedure. Back to the center pedestal and let's switch on so that our IRSs can align. In the real world this could take up to 10 minutes. Back to the overhead panel and we'll work through our flow. All generators set to auto. And our nav lights can come on. At this stage we don't need any other lights on. Landing and taxi lights are off, that's fine. We turn all our hydraulics on by moving them all down. 1, 3 and 4 to auto and number 2 to on. And now it's time to start our APU. Hit the power button to open the APU door, which we can see slowly opening at the base of the tail. Door is open now, so we can start the APU. The start indicator light comes on, and we can see that this is indicating on the status panel. The APU light will go green when it reaches something around 90+%. Then we know we've got power. Whilst that's spooling up, we can carry on with our checks. Boost pump should be off at this stage, that's fine. To set our pressures we first need to go to the ECAS control panel and hit the ECS button. The display will change on our secondary display. At the bottom is landing elevation, which we'll need to set for takeoff and landing. Using right alt and click I can pop the window out so we can see it easier, and we can change the elevation and adjust the pressure by rotating the dial. In this case Farnborough is fairly close to sea level, so I'll be leaving it at 0, but we will be setting it for our landing. We can put our air conditioning packs on. Our APU light is now green and we turn our recirculation fan on. We don't have to worry about our anti-ice, but we are going to turn our windshield heats both on to low, so our windows don't fog up. We don't need our dome light on or anything at this point. Our emergency lights can go to armed and we can put on our passenger signs, as our passengers will be boarding shortly. In this tutorial I'll be covering most of the procedures, but I won't be covering every switch or dial and what they do. If you're looking for more information, there is a YouTuber called The Dude, a CRJ pilot, that has a series of excellent videos. Highly recommended, and I'll leave a link to his channel in the notes below. Just a note, you can also drop the yokes by clicking on this label. Time to adjust our instrument and panel lights as needed. There's a set on the pilot side, a similar set on the co-pilot side, and there's also a set on the center console, each changing different things. Time now to set our barometers for the airport elevation. It's shown here on our primary flight display. I've done my flanning today in SimBrief and we can see the QNH is 1009 at Farnborough. So let's set QNH 1009 first on the pilot side, then the standby altimeter in the center console, and last but not least we also set it on the co-pilot side as well. Back to the lower pedestal, and we want to press both stabilizer trims and the Mac trim on, and then both yaw dampeners. That's done, and whilst we're here we might as well set our transponder. That's at the top of the lower pedestal. Clicking the button on the left hand side highlights, and then using the upper and lower rotary switch we can then change the squawk code to match that given by ATC. Today I'll just make one up. 2525. Transponder is in standby mode, and we can switch it to active by switching it across to the 1 position. Let's just get this armrest out the way, and it's time to program our CDU as part of our SMS system. And the first step is to tell the computer where we are. We press pause in it and enter our location, which is Echo Golf Lima Foxtrot. We'll enter those where we see the small boxes, which are mandatory inputs. We could then copy the coordinates and paste them into set position, but a more accurate way will be to go to the next page. Click the left hand button on the GNS position and it copies it into the scratch pad. Now back to the previous page, click the right hand button next to set position, and there's our position, all set. The computer now knows exactly where we are. Let's get a quick overview of our route. We're going to be departing from runway 24. We're on the west apron, and it's going to be a Hazel to Foxtrot standard instrument departure. It's a relatively short route, flying time only 30 minutes, if that. And it's going to be a Jersey 1 Alpha approach, ILS runway 26 into Jersey. Click on the bottom right button, Flight Plan, and on this page we need to enter relevant information. Firstly, our departure point, Echo Golf Lima Foxtrot, and then our destination, which is Echo Golf Juliet Juliet. As we type, the information comes up at the bottom, an area we call the scratch pad, and then click the button next to the entry point to enter your data. For the sake of completeness, I've also entered an alternate, Lima Foxtrot Romeo Delta. You also get the opportunity, if you want to, enter a flight number. And I'll do that again just for the sake of completeness. I'm going to call it SimHanger 101. That's the primary information entered. Now click execute. That's now in the computer. The next step is to enter our performance initialization data. Press pref in it. And this is where we can enter our weight and fuel data. So it's time to head back to our EFB. Once here, we want to click on the Performance tab. And here we can enter our weight and fuel data. You can change the format by clicking on the Zero Fuel Weight option. But I'm going to enter it manually. We've got 60 passengers on board today. And in the forward cargo, I've got 450 kgs. And in the aft cargo hold, I've got 350 kgs, so 800 altogether. Now to enter my fuel. I used the free planning tool SimBrief to calculate this, so I can pull that data up, and I need 3063 kgs, which includes an allowance for my alternate plus 30 minutes flight time. So now I can enter that. 3063. Enter. A quick cross-check, yes, everything looks right. I can now go ahead and click Set Payload in Simulator, so the sim simulates the weight. We can see the center of gravity's changed, and also copy performance data to FMS. Now we can see all that information has been copied across to the CDU. Fantastic. But there's still some mandatory data required. Our cruise altitude. Our flight plan today calls for 18,000. So we enter 18,000 into the scratch pad and copy it in. We'll also enter our alternate cruise altitude. To enter altitude, you can also enter FL180. But don't enter 180, it'll think it's 180 feet. We're not done here. Note it's page 1 of 3. So let's click next page. And it's asking for wind data, so it can calculate flight time accurately. But I have that data, so I will enter it. Winds for both Farnborough and Jersey are the same, 200 at 18 knots. And for my cruise, it's 225 at 51 knots. Okay, so let's input this. Firstly, our departure, which is 200 at 18. Enter that there. I'm going to enter 200 at 18 again for our destination, for our descent, and 225 at 51 for our cruise. There we go. Wind data entered. That's page 2 of 3 complete. Before we go on to nav setup, let's just check what's on page 3. Nothing there required from me, so we can go ahead to nav setup. VNAV is speed and altitude info, showing our default climb and speeds under 10,000. Transition altitude for Farnborough is 6,000 feet, so we'll execute that. On to page 2. This is for our cruise. That all looks fine. 300 knots, 0.74 Mach. And now page 3, our descent. And transition altitude for Jersey is 5,000 feet. Whoops, not 50,000. That looks better. Let's enter that. And now we can execute and feed that into the FMS. That's our performance and VNAV data completed. We can now go ahead and finish the rest of our flight plan. And we click on Departure Arrivals to plan in our departure. As mentioned earlier, it's runway 24 Hazel to Foxtrot departure. And if we have a quick look at our multi-function display, let's just zoom in a little bit. I'll just change, and we can see it's a dotted line. As soon as we hit execute, it's a solid line. It's programmed into the computer. Let's click on the flight plan button. There's the data we entered, and let's click on next page. And here we can enter our route. Airways on the left and intersections, VORs, etc. on the right. This is our flight plan, so let's enter that. From Hazel, we're taking the Lima 620 airway, and we're going to SAM, which is the Southampton VOR. And we enter that on the opposite side of the airway to indicate that's the termination of travel on that airway. Next is the Q41 airway, and that's to Ortac, which is the beginning of our arrival into Jersey. Let's enter that. Now, if we didn't know our arrival, no problem. We could leave the flight plan there and then complete it whilst in flight, once ATC gave us our arrival. But in this case, we already know it's the Jersey 1 Alpha. We can choose the arrival by clicking on the bottom left-hand side, Departure Arrival Index, and then Arrivals, choosing the Jersey 1 Alpha and runway ILS 26. That's done, so let's now hit execute. We can now check our flight plan by going to the legs page. And here we're looking for anything unexpected or discontinuities. Page 1 is fine. Let's check page 2 by clicking next page. That looks okay. On page 3, Ortac is duplicated and we have a discontinuity. To get rid of this, we click on the bottom Ortac to put it in the scratch pad. Then click on the top Ortac and it will overwrite it. We go back to the previous page, from thread, straight to Ortac. The discontinuity is gone. We have another one right at the end of the page. Go to the next page and copy the valid waypoint back to the previous page and click it and paste it over. In this case, I didn't want the vectors input either. So we now have Jersey, waypoint and Jersey, which is our circle for the ILS approach. That's all done. Let's click execute to put it into the computer. And at last we're done. The co-pilot CDU is automatically linked to the main CDU for the pilot, so the data's there as well. Time now to enter our speed data into the computer. Having already entered our weights, they're already available and they indicate on the PFD. You can of course enter these manually by inputting through this dial, or alternatively you can just click Set All, which is what I'm going to do in this instance. Looking at the PFD, we can see that our V-speeds as well as our initial climb speeds have been entered. Just a note that all the buttons on the ECAS control panel are operational and you can check the status of various aspects of the aircraft. The Stat or Status button is the default one. We're almost ready for pushback, but first we need to set our navs and radios. This is done by clicking the button next to the point that you want to enter, then using the rotary dial in the lower right hand corner to change both the larger and decimal numbers. Clicking the button again will switch frequency. I'll now go through and set common nav radios, but I'll cut this short for purposes of this tutorial. The navs for Southampton and Jersey have been set on both the pilot and on the co-pilot side. We now need to set our altitude, and our cruising altitude is 18,000 feet. So we'll set that, as I'm going to assume that ATC will clear us straight to our cruise altitude. We've now done just about everything we can, so we're pretty much ready for pushback. For this tutorial we'll only use ATC for pushback and taxi. Let's close all the doors.
Before takeoff, we would like to encourage all passengers to watch our cabin crew display the safety features of the aircraft.
Final preparations now for pushback, so our beacon light comes on so that people know the aircraft is about to move. I'll take the handbrake off as Microsoft Flight Simulator pushback is immediate, brakes on or not. Let's now ask for pushback clearance.
Ground, Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo requesting pushback. Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo pushback request accepted. Farnborough Ground, Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo requesting pushback tug to steer the aircraft to the left. Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo, your request has been transmitted to the operator.
You'd normally start the right engine during pushback, but for purposes of this tutorial I won't be doing that.
Farnborough Ground, Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo requesting the end of pushback. Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo request to end pushback received.
Pushback complete and handbrake on. Let's start our engines. First of all, both fuel boosters on. And we'll start with our number 2 engine, our right engine. Click on the start. Then looking at our ECAS primary display, we will see the engine slowly starting to spool up. And we're going to wait till it gets to about 18 to 20%. Once we're at that point, we will release the throttle lock and move it to idle or just slightly forward of idle in order to feed in fuel. And then return the throttle back to idle. The engine will continue to spool up to about 60%, and providing it stays more or less there, it's considered stable. As you saw, we released the throttle by lifting the red lever up. If we don't do this, we won't be able to move the throttle. It'll remain locked on the latch. Engine just coming up on 40%.
Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention as we display the safety features and procedures of the aircraft in case of an emergency. During an emergency, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened and your seats in the upright position. In case of a drop in cabin pressure, breathing masks will drop from the ceiling and should be placed over your head. If there is smoke in the cabin during the evacuation of the aircraft, the walkway emergency lights will display to the exits which are located here and here. In case of an extreme emergency landing, you will be instructed to get into the brace position, which is executed by placing your head between your knees with your hands over your head. We would also like to remind you that you should turn off all electronic devices. We thank you for paying attention during this brief presentation.
On the CDU, if you click on the MFD menu, you're brought up with a number of options at the bottom. Click on the bottom key on the left, and this will cycle through different information available to you on the MFD display. We'll have it set to on for takeoff, and we'll have it set for VNAV on descent. The right engine is stable, so we'll start the left engine, and we'll be following exactly the same process. Wait for the engine to spool up to something around 20%. Not more. Release the throttle from its latch and feed it forward through just forward of idle to feed in fuel, and then back to idle. Whilst we're waiting for the engine to stabilize, we can switch on the flight director. And once on, you'll see it indicated on the primary flight displays. That indicates we've got a good start on both engines, so we can now turn on the cross flow for the fuel for takeoff. And we no longer require the APU, so we can switch that off. We'll also press the APU power button to close the APU door. We don't really want that open during flight. Last preparations before taxi, just check there's no anti-ice warnings, and we can put both probes on. Put our logo lights on if we wanted to. I'm going to put my taxi light on as well, even though you normally wait for ATC clearance. Nose wheel steering armed, and reverse thrusters 1 and 2 on. We're ready for taxi. Let's speak to ATC.
Farnborough Ground, Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo, ready to taxi straight out departure with Kilo. Sierra India Mike Hotel Alpha November Golf Echo Romeo, taxi to and hold short of runway 24 using taxiway Bravo. Contact tower on 122.78 when ready. Taxiing hold short runway 24 using taxiway Echo Yankee Whiskey Charlie Alpha Golf Echo Romeo.
Handbrake now comes off, and very gently move the throttles forward. You only need a little to get her moving, providing it's dry of course. Taxi speed is between 10 and 15 knots per hour. Here we go. Whilst we taxi, we'll be making last-minute preparations for departure. I have to compliment Burning Blue Designs on Farnborough Airport. The airport itself is massive, and the detail included in the airport and beyond will blow your mind. In terms of Payware Airport, for £17, this is in my top 3 and ranks alongside Pilot Plus products. All I can say is if you're interested, it's worth a look. We need to set our final trims, so back to the FB and onto the Performance tab. And there we can see takeoff trim is 7.2. And the current setting is on the secondary display. It's currently 7.5. You can adjust the trim by using the numpad. The figures 1 and 7 adjust the trim. 7.2 trim set. We're currently taxiing along Bravo and will hold at Bravo 1. Then on to runway 24 for our departure. It appears we've got a rogue forklift in front of us. Get a move on, chap, or we're going to run you over. Oh wow, that one's got turbocharge. Setting our flaps to 8, second notch down for departure. We'll hold at Bravo 1 and make our final preparations, but ATC doesn't recognize that as a hold, so we'll taxi onto the runway prior to getting takeoff clearance. Now passing Bravo 2 and shortly be stopping at Bravo 1. Cross-check both PFDs are on FMS 1. You can change the nav source on either the pilot or the co-pilot side. FMS 1 is white. Turning our squawk now onto active. And time for us to put our landing lights on. And also our strobe light, as we'll be moving on to the runway. Gently pushing the thrust levers forward just to get a bit of movement, and then she'll taxi at idle or just above idle. Farnborough Airport, of course, is famous for its air shows, and these white buildings to the left are where the air show is held.
Cleared for takeoff runway 24 Golf Echo Romeo.
We're cleared to get up in the air, and the first thing we're going to do is hit the toga button, and this will also be indicated on the PFD. A quick check on the warning messages, make sure there's nothing that we didn't expect there. That all looks good. A last minute check and reminder on our rotation and climbing speeds. The CRJ is a very quick bird indeed, and things will happen very quickly after takeoff. You can see here the different settings on the throttles. For takeoff, we're going to set it not to max but to toga. Max would only ever be used in an emergency. Once we're past about 1,000 feet, 1,500, we'll be pulling the throttles back to climb. If you have the option selected on the FB, then the throttle condition will be shown on the PFD on the pilot side. Due to where the engines are located on the aircraft, on takeoff we need to pull the nose up, perhaps a little bit more than you're used to. 15 to 20 degrees. She'll climb very quickly, and you'll need to set your speed. There's no auto throttle. She'll manage your speed on the climb, but that's it. After that, it's manual. Flaps up at about 200 knots. It's time to get away. We're going to set the stopwatch on the clock and gently move the thrust levers about 1/3 of the way along just to get moving. Holding the center of the runway, and airspeed is alive. Nearly 125 knots, V1, V2, rotate, pull the nose up, positive lift, pull the nose up 15% and then 20%. Watching my PFD for indicated airspeed for the climb. I'm just starting to drop below that a little bit, so I will just lower the nose a little bit and gear is up. 1,000 feet, so autopilot on. I'm going to put on nav and I'm also going to put on speed so it can manage my climb speed. Now lowering my nose to about 10% to allow my speed to increase. There's quite a lot of twists and turns on this departure, so I'm going to keep it at about 230 knots. We don't want to be too fast for the turns. We're climbing quickly at nearly 2,000 feet per minute and coming up on 200 knots, so flaps away and throttles back to climb.
Leaving my airspace, frequency change approved. Farnborough Tower, Sierra India Mike Hotel, Alpha November Golf, Echo Romeo frequency
Coming up
change.
on my set speed, and I think I'll just increase this a little to 240 knots. If this was a straight out departure, I'd be setting it for 250 under 10,000 feet. But as you can see, this is a bit of a torturous route for our departure. Time to set us up for our after takeoff and our climb. Taxi lights can go off and our manual crossfeed can go back to auto. And as a safety precaution, we turn our reverse thrusters off, both 1 and 2. Climbing through 5,300 feet, so we'll shortly be hitting our transition altitude. Our pressure setting on the PFD is starting to flash, warning us to change to standard. So we'll change it on the pilot side, the standby altimeter, and also on the co-pilot side. 7,000 feet, and we're climbing at nearly 4,000 feet per minute at the moment. Using the outer range dial, let's have a quick look at our route. The main reason for such a challenging departure is to take us away from the London and Heathrow traffic area. I'm going to stay at 240 knots until we're past Hazel at least. We'll shortly be at 10,000 feet, so landing lights can now come off. And normally the cabin signs would be switched off as well. But I'm going to leave them on for now as we're still doing quite a lot of turning. And this is for the safety of the passengers. Nav 1 is set for Southampton. We can view this on the PFD by clicking the bearing button. And it appears as a magenta indicator. So I now have indicators for both VOR and nav. Nav 2 on the co-pilot side is set to Jersey 112.20, and I can bring this up by hitting the button below the bearing button. For both pilot and co-pilot, multiple presses of the various buttons will display different information. That was the warning indicator that we're approaching our set altitude, which in this case is our cruise altitude of 18,000 feet. The altitude capture indicator on the PFD is also flashing to show the aircraft is trying to capture this set altitude. Note on the autopilot panel that the speed setting is no longer lit. As far as the aircraft is concerned, the climb mode is over. It's now manual control of throttles. I'm going to leave it where it is just for now and allow us to increase speed to our cruising speed of 300 knots. We're almost over Southampton. The altitude indicator on the PFD has changed to Alt-S, indicating altitude successfully captured. And we're now at cruise speed, so we'll be adjusting and pulling back into manual on our throttles. We're now at cruise and on our way to Jersey, so we can now turn off the passenger signs. It's a short flight, so anybody busting for the loo better go now. And this brings us to the end of part 1 of our 2-part series on flying the CRJ from Aerosoft for Microsoft Flight Simulator. In part 2 we will go through the descent, switch to heading mode to swing round the Jersey VOR, then an ILS runway 26 into Jersey. Thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2. And I hope you've been enjoying flying the CRJ as much as I have. Stay safe and look after yourselves, and bye for now.